Okay, so the fourth thing to think about when purchasing a rental property is understanding the law and then drafting the appropriate lease. Now, when we talk about understanding the law, there's a lot of different rules and laws that govern tenant rights and landlord obligations. And as I referenced in the intro to this video, is that they vary widely by state, and most of it is state driven. So up front, you're going to need to do some research to make sure that you understand your obligations as a landlord and important steps you'll need to take. Examples of this from my own personal experience is for the city of Chicago. There's a document called the CRLTO, or Chicago Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance, that largely dictates the relationship and the rules around landlord and tenant engagements. And some examples from that of things you would need to know is that, if you take a damage deposit, for example, when a tenant moves in, that you are obligated to pay a set interest rate each year on the renewal of that lease to the tenant. And so it doesn't sound like that big of a deal, right? The interest rate is kind of a standard bank interest rate. So let's say you had a $1,800 damage deposit. It's going to equate to something like 27 cents. But the reason it's important to know to do that is that the law also says that if you fail to do that, the tenant is entitled to essentially twice the damage deposit. So in other words, you forget to do that, your tenant gets a lawyer, they contact you and say, hey, you owe them $3,600 or twice the damage deposit because you forgot to give me my 27 cents interest on my security deposit this year. There's also, in the Chicago CRLTO, a lot of rules around how you evict someone. For example, you basically need a lawyer and have to follow the exact process. And when, to think about drafting a lease, there's certain things you have to put in that lease that we'll talk about in a second. Another example would be from our property in Aurora, Illinois. There, one of the unique things set by that city is that you essentially need to have a landlord rental license. And it's not that hard to get, but you need to get one and have it updated every year. And essentially what it is it's going to be an Aurora inspector each year going through the unit to make sure that it's a safe and habitable place for the tenant to live, as well as, they'll want to see a copy of a background check and the lease to make sure that, they meet the qualifications to be a renter in that city. So there's a couple of examples of why you need to understand what the law is in your state or city to make sure that you are complying with it. What I would say is you can figure out most of this stuff through Google research. If you just Google like Illinois landlord obligations, you'll be redirected to the CRLTO, in a lot of different ways, so you can read up that way, or consult with a lawyer. Typically, they'll call themselves a landlord tenant lawyer, is the type of person who specifies in these things, and they'll be able to direct you to exactly the key things you need to be doing. They'll be able to help you draft a lease or even provide a stock template for one. Obviously, the downside is reaching out to a lawyer directly is typically that will cost money versus Google research being free. So then when we talk about drafting the appropriate lease document, a lot of what's going to kind of direct you in terms of making sure you have the right lease document is that understanding of the law. For example, in the city of Chicago, you're required to have disclosures on if there's lead-based paint, documentation on essentially bed bugs, and some other pieces that are a requirement of any lease. So if I went to Google and try to find a template for a lease in Chicago, the first couple of pages might be different in terms of how they draft up the sections and clauses around rent and other things, but they'll be followed by about 22 pages of required documents. If they don't have those, you're technically once again in violation of the CRLTO. So there's a lot of good lease template sites out there. The disclaimer is how do you know if the one you're looking at is truly legitimate or it is truly accredited with the right lease versus just something that might be outdated from 8 or 9 years ago. I say cross-referenced it with a lot of research. And the end-all be-all to make sure that you got the right thing is to have a landlord tenant lawyer look at it. I know when we drafted our first lease in Chicago, since I know the rules here are very particular, and I had drafted my own rider of additional rules and expectations of tenants that I wanted to attach to more of a standard lease. I did have a landlord tenant lawyer look at it to provide some feedback and take that one-time cost to make sure that I was setting myself up for success. So moral of the story is, on either of these topics, law or leases, the best thing you can do, once again, is Google research. If in doubt, contact a landlord tenant lawyer, so that whether it be that you are acting in a way compliant with the law, or that you have the appropriate lease document for your rental property, that you can feel comfortable on both of those.